Thanks for staying with us. My guest today, Jim Schultz with Open Prairie. And just before the break, we were talking about some success stories. We talked about eyesight, which everybody's excited about. It turned out to be such a great story here locally. And of course, you told us that you were one of the investors in that through Open Prairie. And then you mentioned
Tomotherapy.
Tomotherapy, yes. Tell us about it.
We took tomotherapy public in May of '07, and I think we all suffer this here in the Midwest. We're the flyover states. The Midwest is not recognized as being prominent and opportunistic. And I happened to be in Silicon Valley 2 days after the tomotherapy IPO. And it was the fourth largest venture-backed IPO in the healthcare sector in the history of venture capital.
Really?
And we were fortunate to have been an investor in that. And so I'm in Silicon Valley sitting next to a guy from Sequoia Capital. I won't mention his name, but he kind of looked at me like, "You guys did an IPO?" Like, "Yeah, probably something on some foreign exchange or something." I said, "No, it was the NASDAQ." "Well, how big was it?" "Well, it was 250 million. "Oh, that was the market cap." I said, "No, that's how much we raised." And I could have picked his jaw off the table. He was so shocked he couldn't believe it that we in the Midwest could have something that significant.
See, I tell you, there's something in the water in Effingham. I'm telling you, it's just great stuff.
I'll ship some up.
Yeah, please. I need it. I need it. Well, that's wonderful. You mentioned the chip company that makes for cell phones, EpiWorks?
EpiWorks, yes.
And I have just a small little tangential contact with them because originally when they were in the old commercialization technology lab, there was 4 or 5 of them sitting around a table about this big and 2 telephones, and that was it. That was their company. And we had the privilege of working with them to find a building, and we introduced them into some engineers to help them build a clean room. They had a big old $1 million clean room built. And now we see them, they're still here 10, 12 years later, and they're profitable, I believe, now.
Yes.
And took some time to get there, but they're there. They have employees. They're, I think, in an expanding market with cell phones proliferating the planet. And I think that may be your next big success story.
We're confident of that. I think Dr. David Amari and Dr. Quinnell Hartman have done a fabulous job of taking an idea, taking it to the lab, building these wafers, making them into chips. If you didn't know this, an Apple iPhone has 3 chips in it that are made from wafers manufactured out here on the north side of town at EpiWorks.
I did not know that.
So there's a lot of interesting global connection here to the company EpiWorks.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yes.
Well, I don't want our time to get away. You brought some books and some other things. I want to make sure you get a chance to talk about some things you wanted to talk about. What is tomorrow's table, and what's pertinent about that, and why did you bring it in?
You know, I brought it along because I think there's a lot of need to look at our agricultural supply, and I look at what we have here in the Midwest as a great opportunity. We're investing in startup companies that are developing agricultural technologies that will change how crops are growing going forward, how animals are raised, etc. As we as a planet go from 6 billion people to almost 9 billion people as forecasted by 2050, our food needs are going to only increase. There's a very famous quote that I like to use often, and I have to flip to it because I frequently don't get it in the right order, but it's 130, 70, 32.
130, 70,
130, 70, 32. 4 numbers.
Okay.
We're going to have to increase our food supply by 100% in the next 30 years to feed the world. 100% increase in food supply in the next 30 years. 70% of that's going to come from technology, and it's going to be done on 1/32 of the land mass. Today we're producing on about 5% of the land mass, so we're going to shrink our land mass from 5% down to about 3.3%. So that means that more technology is going to be needed. This book is a great footprint of the convergence of organic and conventional agriculture, and a thing we call sustainable agriculture, and the need for both, but you can't eliminate some of the traditional ways of doing things just because of the need for food supply. As we saw a couple of years ago, we had riots in parts of in Southeast Asia where food supplies there were shortage of rice, etc.
Right.
So we think that this is a great footprint. We have had some of the preeminent venture funds coming into Champaign in the last few months, talking to us about opportunities in the ag space because they see it too as a new wave, a new opportunity. We saw the internet being the predominant investment opportunity in the late 90s, clean tech in the mid part of this last decade, and we think agriculture is the new opportunity in this current decade.
Wow. Well, I can tell you one thing for sure, people will still want to eat. And if we have a lot more people then there's going to be a lot more demand, which may put a little pressure on our food costs. But if technology seems to have been the answer all along, we've continued to improve ag science over the last century. But if I hear you right, we're going to have to improve it at a rate that never before seen in order just to keep up with the demand.
We really think so.
Yeah. And the other book here is the first 75 years, John M. Schultz, a man in his company. Now, is that the seed company, your dad?
That was my grandfather started a seed
grandfather,
company
okay.
in Diedrich, Illinois, and during the first depression back in 1907, he was successful in navigating through that financially by helping farmers buy seed and purchase their seed, and he created a seed business out of what was a hardware store because he was successful in helping farmers and built that into a global business. And this book was written by my mother and is somewhat of an inspiration to me as to what you can do as an entrepreneur if you put your mind to it and figure out a way how to create opportunity even in difficult times. We're currently are in a difficult recessionary period, and in many ways people look at this period as something that's too challenging, but we see it as opportunity.
Wonderful. Well, I want to expand on that a little bit, and maybe you can give us your view of the future, piggyback on some of these comments when we come back from the break. Great. Super duper. We'll be right back. Talk more with Jim Schultz from Open Prairie. You're watching One on One. Thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Alex Ruggieri, and our guest today is Jim Schultz with Open Prairie Ventures. Just before the break, we were talking about the book Tomorrow's Table and the implications for the future in our food supply. And we also touched on this book that your mother wrote, The First 75 Years, which was the founding of the seed company that your grandfather had started in an old hardware store. So I had to cut you a little short, but I wanted to just kind of touch base on his story, and then I'd like to, if you can, share your views on the future in the few minutes that we have left.
Great.
And see what you think we might want to keep our eyes on. But Grandpa Schultz started the seed company, and you said something that intrigued me. Started in a hardware store, but then became a global company. How did that happen?
He discovered at the end of one of his calendar years that he was making more money trading grain seed for his hardware when the farmers didn't have cash to pay for the hardware supplies. So he decided to get into the grain business, and between 1903 and the mid-'80s grew it into a global business with production in Brazil, exports to Korea, Japan, etc. And it was about a $250 million a year business when we sold it in the late 80s.
Oh my goodness.
So it was a very successful venture for the family.
Incredible. And how long did he live?
He passed away in the early 50s, so he died unexpectedly of a heart attack.
I see.
So my
And
father ran
your
the business
dad
after
must
that.
have- yeah.
Yes. So I learned a lot about agriculture from my father, and that's largely what we're taking as a discipline today to the next generation as an opportunity.
Well, you talk about the next generation. What would you say to a young person who's thinking about, a career in business or entrepreneurship or anything like that? Do you have any words of wisdom or touchstones?
Yeah, I think the thing I continue to emphasize when I meet with a lot of young individuals is passion. Pursue your passion. I had the opportunity to take my middle son, John, to a college visit, and he thought he was going to have to study business because that's what I do. And he said, I really want to be a sports broadcaster. And I said, that's your passion, go pursue it.
Great.
So he's going into sports broadcasting at the University of Missouri this fall.
Good for him. That was it, Joseph Campbell, who said, follow your bliss.
Yes.
And that's great advice. Well, in the few minutes that we have remaining, what do you see in the future with regard to Open Prairie, with regard to the investment arena for venture capital? Anything you'd like to share with us?
Despite the challenging economic times we live in, we think the greatest companies are created during those times because entrepreneurs become more creative, more opportunistic, and so we see the future ahead very bright, in a bright way.
I love it.
We think that, again, agriculture is a large opportunity and gets back to our ecosystem and our tradition and history that we have in this region.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's almost in our roots, it's almost in our blood or something.
Yes.
But I had Dr. Ray Price here, and he had written a book on innovation of Hewlett-Packard. And he and his, I can't remember Charles's last name, but they both worked at Hewlett-Packard when there was less than 100 people working there. And they knew Mr. Hewlett and Mr. Packard personally. And this was years ago, but that company was started in a recessionary time.
Yes.
And now it's one of the largest, if not the largest, technology company in the world,
Yes.
not just in the United States. So, very, very good stuff. Well, I'm going to finish the interview today by making you promise you're going to send me some water from
I will.
Effingham. I just want to thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your insights. You're doing great things with Open Prairie. I wish you years of success. It's a wonderful thing to have capital to invest in these wonderful businesses that are spinning off the university in other areas. So keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you. We will.
Thanks.
Thanks for the time.
You bet. We've been talking with Jim Schultz from Open Prairie Ventures. Thanks for joining us today.